welcome everybody. I'm Joe Tarnowski with ECRM. If you're not already getting tired of seeing me all day long on these things, thanks for joining us again. As we've all seen during the pandemic, it's clear that the future of shopping is omnichannel. And today's consumers should be seen as either a current or a prospective omni shopper. So during this presentation, NielsenIQ North America commercial lead Liz Buchanan will provide us with insights about today's omni food shopper and show why brands must now know exactly who their customers are and fully understand their behaviors to predict what they will need in the future. So a little bit about Liz. So with a wealth of experience in the CPG and retail world, Liz helps retailers and manufacturers navigate rapidly evolving consumer and shopper landscape. During her 13 years at Nielsen, she's held various roles in customer success, commercial, and technology deployment. She's worked extensively across the US and global markets, supporting global brands, global retail, financial services, and agencies. So just a reminder, you could submit your questions at any time through the chat window on the right of your screen, and then we'll hit those as soon as the presentation's over. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn the stage over to Liz.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe, and to the entire ECRM team. Good afternoon to everyone who's attending today's discussion. As mentioned, I'm Liz Buchanan, and I lead our customer success teams at NielsenIQ here in North America and for global clients. As a point of introduction, NielsenIQ is a newly independent company as of 2021 after a spin-off from the Nielsen Media business earlier this year. At NielsenIQ, our singular focus is on helping brands and merchants compete and win in this new and evolving CPG retail landscape. The last year brought with it a number of important lessons for the industry, many of which will form the backdrop for today's conversation. But maybe the single most important lesson is the concept of reimagination. Arthur Nielsen first invented market share and retail measurement back in the 1930s. And until recently, to measure consumer goods in retail, you could largely rely upon an understanding of brick and mortar retailing. Fast forward to today, and NIQ, a 90-year-old startup, finds itself in the same place as so many in the industry, trying to establish a new normal as a history-making global pandemic changed the world as we have come to know it. The food and beverage landscape was disrupted on multiple fronts. E-commerce went from niche to necessary. Manufacturers and retailers grappled with supply chain and overnight restructuring toward an omni model. And we at NIQ launched new COVID solutions in a matter of weeks to help our customers try and make good decisions during a time of great uncertainty. And as the consumers' COVID necessitated changed behavior persisted, and we frankly saw the staying power of that change, we accelerated new omni-first solutions by integrating e-com into everything we do. But I think in this moment, we collectively see that the ambitions of the industry are not necessarily enabled by the current reality. Since the 80s, we've been traveling together down a two-lane highway, following a familiar map of category management. And suddenly, 2020 dramatically accelerated not only a change in the road itself, I think this is now like a 8-lane expressway with a couple of HOV lanes and a lot of construction happening, but the destination, the drivers, and certainly the map have all evolved too. Said another way, we find ourselves at the proverbial fork in the road. Clear that what lies ahead is quite different than what came before, but not yet entirely prepared for the next leg of the journey. So having lapped the onset of the pandemic, we have looked at trends year over year, and we've begun to assess what these 2021 early figures tell us about the road ahead. In today's analysis, we're going to compare trends pre, during, and post-COVID, or present day, as a bit of a litmus test. So let's go ahead and dive in. Go ahead and advance, Joe. Today, we'll explore 3 themes driving the future of CPG. These are category bifurcation. So we see 2 distinct universes that have emerged in category growth rates pre and post-COVID. Income polarization, the economically constrained and economically insulated, now with a view to the current US economy and the future inflationary environment, and omni-channel retailing. So online CPG obviously continues to grow. Consumers are now making decisions in a very different context than they were in 2019. So a lot to unpack on this one, and we'll spend some time doing just that. Next slide. So let's start with category bifurcation. Go ahead and click in. And here we look at pre-COVID, peak COVID, and what we're calling post-COVID, as much as we can call current state post-COVID, knowing that we're not truly there yet. And the overall rates of growth that we see are still up for CPG versus 2019. You can see here that blue line in the middle at about 13% for total FMCG as you look at the 2019 versus 2021 number for that latest period. But you have clear bifurcation between those categories that grew during 2021 or those that have begun to decline. And so here, 53% essentially of category dollars belong to decliners at this point, categories that declined in 2021 versus same period in 2020, and 47% continue to grow. So we'll talk a bit about what do we think that means in just a minute. Let's go on to the next page. Really owing to reemergence, the biggest change in food and bev is amongst those categories that are relevant to a population that's now more on the go. Prepared foods, have really rebounded following a significant decline or shutdown completely of that department during peak COVID, or very different alternative models like partnering with food delivery services. Diet and nutrition, as people jumpstart their fitness in a post-COVID world. I think just about everybody that I know bought a Peloton during COVID. And here, as you see, people are continuing to try and move a little bit more as the world is opening up, and you see those diet and nutrition categories continuing to pop. And then individual snacking. Many kids were back in the classroom this spring as we looked at these numbers, and some folks obviously returning to offices. A difference versus what we saw in 2020, which is that middle bar in the center there. Amongst the categories that fared well during COVID and whose growth sort of persists are beverages, fresh fruit, and family-sized snacking. And when you look at those growth rates versus pre-COVID, it stands to reason that some new habits have persisted. These categories are sort of ones to keep an eye on as the reemergence progresses. And in particular, in the middle there, fresh fruit really having been flat in 2019, obviously a significant spike in 2020 as everybody was eating at home a lot more. And we continue to see that category in particular up in 2021. Let's go ahead and click into the next page. Growers continue to then, of course, see a tremendous boost from online sales. And here we've split this by that which is shipped to home versus that which is click and carry or click and collect, or BOPUS, choose your term. But with click and carry up over 200% from 2019, and continued basket growth as those who adopted click and carry during the pandemic continue to rely upon it for more of their shopping needs. We saw an increase even recently from April to May, just this past month, of trip size up 5% versus prior month. So this continues to be a very important part of the overall industry for food in particular. And it's something that we don't see changing in the coming weeks and months. While ship to home continues to dominate, it is still the larger piece of the overall pie. As you think about some of the very, very large players in that space, click and carry continues to make significant gains. It was about 34% of online food dollars in 2019, and now is up to nearly 50% in 2021. So let's go on, click on into the next slide, please. And I want to pivot to our second theme, income polarization. Throughout COVID, we've published a number of pieces around new COVID segments from a consumer lens. And if you want to check those out in further detail, all of that work is on our website at NielsenIQ.com. But the two significant consumer segments that we have followed closely are those who were economically constrained as a result of COVID, and those who were newly economically insulated as a result of COVID. So let's jump in and talk a bit about what that looks like. Looking at a number of factors, average adjusted household income has decreased since 2019. Probably no surprise there. The low household income bar on the left that you see has the largest percent of gray at 34%, this is a decrease in income from 20 to 21. We knew that those were already low-income households, and unfortunately, they've become even more constrained to the tune of about $4,000 annually. Those who were high income have also seen the highest percent of income increase of any group during COVID. We also knew that this group typically spends a higher percentage of their disposable income on services, restaurants, travel, all of which are restricted. So they both made more and saved more, which created a significantly different reality for these folks than those with the lowest income. It's important to note here that constrained consumers can be in any of the income levels. You see on the page, a high income household could have experienced a job loss or a furlough or gone down to a single income during COVID, which would have meant that they were in the constrained segment. So think about insulated and constrained, not about income level, but really about income impact within your income level or income bracket due to COVID. Let's go on to the next slide. This was further compounded by the prospect, or it will be further compounded by the prospect of looming inflation. And this comes sort of in two parts. There's obviously the consumer price rebounds that are happening after a year of supply chain challenges, halted promotional activity, and that sort of picking back up, and obviously price resets happening across the board. So that price consumers see on the shelf is higher, but also an overall economic environment that's tending toward inflation. One where, frankly, demand outpaces supply in a number of industries and areas. Commodity costs have increased as oil prices have rebounded, or industries face worker shortages. Businesses are assessing potential changes given the geopolitical environment around trade and thinking about where they actually source various commodities from, all while, of course, facing pressure to maintain post-COVID growth trajectories. So there have also been positive tailwinds, despite all that I just shared, around increased levels of productivity in some industries, especially those where COVID accelerated tech adoption or new ways of working. But nonetheless, we enter a period of uncertainty around the industry's economics and, frankly, the country's economics, with most economists optimistic about the future of the U.S. economy in the mid to long term, and the very real economics of the consumer groups we just looked at a slide ago. That will really necessitate different strategies for brands and retailers over the next 12 to 24 months. And so what does this really mean for brands and retailers? It means a need to deeply understand the consumer and their relationship to price. Price sensitivity manifests itself in different ways. Let's go ahead to the next page. There's obviously price elasticity, of course. We understand that consumers respond differently to price changes during COVID-19, and certainly now with the reemergence, we'll have a potentially new relationship to price. We've also continued to see growth in private label, especially online, as amongst those most constrained shoppers, and as those most constrained shoppers are using online as a way to price explore. That was an early finding from the work that we did with the constrained and insulated consumers, and we're surprised to find that the constrained consumers had actually adopted online at a higher rate than insulated consumers. And that really is driven by the need to do price exploration and find the best deals. And then, of course, where they shop. So this continues to be an evolving landscape where everyone is now operating in a truly omni environment and have more choices and options that are available to them than they did in the past. So understanding your shopper's profile is critical. Level of constraint versus insulation, adoption of e-commerce, fulfillment model preferences, assortment choices, price sensitivity, so that as you make merchandising decisions, they're done in the context of that true new consumer reality. Let's go ahead on to the next slide. Consumers will continue to make strategic shifts, not tactical tweaks if needed, and they're doing what they need to do in order to manage the environment. Some will buy private brands, eat out less, trade down or up in categories, making shopping lists to limit waste and excess, shifting channels to shop for the best value. Again, thinking about that true omni context that all decisions are being made in now, and making sure that as you're thinking about those merchandising tactics and decisions, that you as well understand the true omni environment available to the shopper, making sure that we're helping those consumers and shoppers finding convenience and managing spend based on this new environment. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about what is perhaps the biggest change to that consumer reality, and that is that all decisions are now made in an omni context. 40% of CPG shoppers are now omni shoppers. Let's go on to the next page. Food and beverage surpassed other more mature CPG categories. Think baby, pet, home cleaning, personal care, those that really were adopted early from a .com perspective. In 2020 become the largest CPG category. And we expect that online sales of food and beverage to continue to grow throughout 2021. Percent of total food and beverage sales that were online in 2019 was 5%, up to 9% in 2020. And what we're looking at now is essentially a range here from a forecast perspective. On the low end to something closer to 13%, on the higher end, something closer to 15%. Our three forecast scenarios take slightly different lenses on the environment, and in particular, think about penetration and buying rate differences in order to derive that low, average, and high-end scenario. So in some scenarios, we see that penetration attrition will occur as consumers go back to shopping in store. And think about retirees, perhaps, as a good example of this. Many adopted home delivery for the first time during COVID for health and safety reasons, but have returned to the in-store occasion post-vaccination. And, in another scenario that we continue to grow levels of penetration, but buying rate decreases. Folks who were buying online previously continue to buy online, but perhaps buy less on average as people return to eating and drinking out of the home in addition to eating in the home. Or that we maintain and grow penetration and buying rate at rates less than 2020 certainly, but on a growth trajectory. Go on to the next page. The overarching verdict, I think, is that the example I gave of retirees is probably going to be the exception and not the rule. Shopping online will remain, even as restrictions continue to ease. Consumers will persist their hard-learned habits and behaviors. We've seen that the order per buyer online continues to increase year over year since 2019 with no sign of slowing down. And sort of by the numbers here, 22 million new online CPG shoppers in 2020, 40%, as I mentioned, of CPG shoppers are now omni shoppers. 160 billion dollars online in CPG sales in the last year, and 44% of e-com dollar share comes from food and bev. So this is a very different landscape than the one that we were looking at in 2019, and one that we expect really has reframed or reshaped what will come next as well. Let's go into the next slide. Preferences continue to evolve, and it's critical to keep a strong pulse on them. We see online growth across all cohorts, but especially amongst millennials and boomers, up 8% and 5%. We see consumer expectations around delivery speeds continue to increase. So same day, next day, up 7 points, with 2+ day delivery down 11 points in terms of what shoppers are looking for in their online experience. And then their reason for shopping online, largely the critical reasons for shopping online have to do with ease and convenience. Scheduling ease is less important now. We believe this change is really due to us kind of lapping that major grocery scheduling challenge that we had at the beginning of the pandemic. As everyone was rushing to adopt an Instacart account, for example, and place an order online, and delivery times were quite long or often several days away. And so now we're lapping that. And so easy delivery scheduling is less critical than it was a year ago at this time. But order history continues to be critical. And so you see the ability to go in and, again, do your shopping easily looking back at what you've purchased previously and being able to make selections based on those preferences are critical. We've also seen, maybe anecdotally, more than through the data itself, but that master data or digital product content and search continue to improve over the last 12 months. We had heard about a lot of challenges and saw a lot of challenges with that in the early days of the pandemic. We've seen dramatic and continued improvements in both marketplaces and .com retail, improving that digital product content. This is an area that e-com players will need to continue to invest to maintain consumer engagement with the platform. Those, frankly, who do this best will continue to win. Let's go ahead and click into the next slide. So I want to wrap up this part of the conversation by just sort of saying, what does this all mean? I talked at the beginning about reimagination, and that being a critical learning or set of kind of context for today's discussion. This pivot point requires us to critically look at the industry and, frankly, not just make step changes, but to reimagine the practices we've come to know to compete in a world that, frankly, we still don't know very well. But as we think about this pivot point or fork, we can start with understanding the consumer and shopper along these three dimensions. Then category bifurcation, understanding the trajectory of growers and decliners is critical. This is something we will need to continue to have a pulse on as things continue to open up and patterns continue to evolve. And that's certainly something you can count on NIQ to continue to provide for you, as this is something we're tracking regularly and looking at all the time. Income polarization, critical that we're managing pricing with precision during this time, especially as so much of the omni pricing environment goes algorithmic. Remaining competitive on KPIs, for example, is going to be critical. And then omni-channel retailing, continuing to focus on driving the best digital experience that starts with content and search. I kind of overstate the importance of strong digital product content and attribution at this time, and making sure that you've got a strong presence in that space. So with that, I'll thank you so much for spending the last 20 minutes with us, and just want to say a big thank you as well to the NIQ team who helped to put this content together today under the leadership of Meg Major, Nikhil Sharma, and Mary Podvin. Joe, I think now we'll have a bit of dialogue and Q&A and hopefully go from there. Yeah, definitely. And thanks for the information. And it's just interesting how much the shopper journey has changed. I mean, what we're hearing a lot from buyers when I have meetings with them at our sessions, they're talking about, across categories, consumers are far more educated now about products and ingredients because they're spending so much more time online, especially obviously during a pandemic. So their shopper journey is starting in so many different places. It's kind of hard to like put your finger on it. And that, that's one question for you is, measuring omni-channel sales, right? It's historically been difficult. How do you see this unfolding over time? Oh yeah, that's a very good question, and one we think about all the time. As I mentioned at the opening, it used to be enough to be able to rely upon sort of direct data sharing from retail, and now that obviously that environment has changed pretty dramatically, and so. We think about it in a couple of ways. There continues to be, a sort of direct data access engagement with retail that is critical and helpful. But also, I would say maybe novel approaches to measurement have emerged. In our case, for example, sort of large panel-based approaches that really let us understand what is happening at a retailer where otherwise we would be blind. And that's something that's not just useful for brands, but is really useful for retailers themselves, because they know a lot about what happens in their four walls or on their digital.com, but they don't know as much about what happens outside of their four walls. So being able to do that through those novel approaches actually enables that data sharing to be able to help retailers understand the competitive environment as well. That's something that we've been hard at work at. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're now kind of bringing Omni to everything that we do, and so as we think about measuring performance, it's definitely in that Omni context going forward. Yeah, because like as a brand, I could sell in the store, I could sell on that store's website, I could sell through a third-party website, I could sell on Amazon, on Facebook, Instagram, you name it. There's so many places where I could sell. So just tracking it and putting all those pieces together, it's definitely going to be a challenge. And one of the things that has been the hardest about that is deduplicating all of that, because frankly, you're the same transaction could show up in multiple places depending upon where you're picking up the data along that chain that you just mentioned. And so making sure that what the read that you're getting is something that's consistent, that's deduplicated, that is able to provide that kind of end-to-end context as well as depth, and being able to really understand the products that are driving sales too.
Yeah, and then on the marketing side, how do you know, like, if maybe I saw it on Instagram but didn't purchase it on Instagram, but went into the store because of that? There's so many things you got to track these days. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's right. I think those digital demand signals and sort of the
Mhm.
consumer journey work that, is more important than ever, and really understanding, what does it take to win? Where do consumers learn about products? What drives them to actually purchase? And how do we make sure that we're helping people capitalize on all those touch points?
Excellent. Okay, I have a long question here that just came in. Okay, you mentioned health and wellness consumption had been soaring since the pandemic, specifically on food and beverage. How are consumers searching for health and wellness products, and how are they gathering information to decide what to start buying to improve their health and wellness?
That's a great question. And one that actually would be perfect for our Label Insight team. I don't know if everybody saw, but we just acquired Label Insight, and this is exactly what they do, right? So they provide that sort of referential data around health and wellness, as well as other product attribution, to be able to not only power digital search, but also to help with other things, like in working with government agencies, FDA, et cetera, on food labeling. And so what we see is, and I kind of made mention of this in the context of omni-channel retailing, but what we see is that the digital product content is more important than ever. People search with terms like keto, and it's critical, for example, that if your product is keto, it's tagged as keto so that it actually shows up in that search. And for so many products today, that it wouldn't show up, and you'd be missing out on an opportunity, and consumers, frankly, would be missing out on an awareness opportunity. So there's just a critical, I'm going to keep reinforcing it, but there's just a critical element here around that product kind of reference information, making sure that that's done with the latest trends, and health and wellness certainly being a big one in mind.
Well, speaking of consumer trends, were there any significant consumer shifts that you think brands and retailers need to be mindful of, or maybe they're not paying enough attention to?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to this question yet, but I'll say one thing I want to keep an eye on maybe is that there have just been a number of people who've left the workforce, and in particular, a lot of women who've left the workforce due to COVID. And, we know that women were sort of disproportionately impacted from a work-life perspective due to COVID. And the same, we saw people leaving the workforce as well, maybe from a retiree perspective, retired early, and who are now on kind of a fixed income as that inflation that we talked about happens. How will this environment change, and what are sort of the larger macro implications of those two major shifts? I don't know the answer yet, but it's something that I certainly am going to keep watching.
I have a cost-related question for you. So how has omni shopping impacted markup and margins to retailer and distribution landscapes?
That is a hairy question. So it is definitely added cost, right? It's a more expensive model in a lot of ways, and those costs we see are certainly passed from retailer to manufacturer. It kind of comes in a number of different formats. It could be margin pressure, so thinking about redistributing the portfolio, optimizing SKUs. Is a 6-pack more efficient than a 48-pack, vice versa, right, in terms of margin? It could come in the form of exclusive items or custom product offerings for .com, which we know carry a higher cost for manufacturers. Things like e-com ready packaging. We saw that a lot in the laundry category to kind of help it make it lighter to ship. So there's a cost to serve that's just different in terms of the way that everybody has to go to market. You see it in terms of inventory management, so fees or on delays, for example, or fines on delays, and then even things like data monetization, right? Or kind of the continued diversion of dollars to retail media and physical advertising space. So that everyone is trying to solve this problem and doing it. There are a lot of different models that are emerging, but those are some of the prominent ones for sure.
Gotcha. Somebody came through the chat is looking for more of a clarification. They said, do I understand you correctly that Omni offers statistics about consumers' buying patterns?
I don't know if I
Not,
understand that
yeah, I'm
question.
not exactly sure, unless maybe statistics that you're tracking, not Omni, but you in tracking omnichannel.
Sure. So we think about Omni from two lenses. So we have essentially think about it from measurement, which is just sales and share. So we want to make sure we have the most comprehensive understanding of sales and share. Again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that it's deduplicated, that it's fully representing all channels. So you've got your Amazon and their Instacart. They're able to actually see Instacart by the banners through which Instacart plays, et cetera. But then also from a consumer lens, so that you are able to fully understand the same consumer or shopper's buying behavior online and offline. So what is the Walmart.com shopper doing when they're not shopping on Walmart.com? Who are they? What's in their basket? What's their kind of household composition? Where else do they shop, for example? So yes, we can essentially do both. It's both consumer and shopper kind of diagnostics and understanding from a who perspective, and then it's also the what and the sizing and making sure that you've got that performance data that is fully omni.
And like you mentioned before, the challenging part is it's going to continue shifting, right? Now, as people are getting back outside, we already saw the shift when COVID happened. And I use myself as an example. April, May of last year, I stopped going to the supermarket in my neighborhood and switched to the organic market around the corner.
Yeah.
Not so much, mostly because of a time savings. There was a line, and it was so not crowded, but it just took long to get in there. I could just dart in and out. But then I also switched to online for certain products. Now things are opening up, though. I'm sticking with the organic market and those just because of convenience. But I am gonna eat out more, so some things are gonna drop. So just seeing what that shift is, and that kind of leads to our final question: what is the next big milestone that Nielsen IQ has its eye on during COVID recovery?
So I think it's probably September is what I would call it. Mm-hmm. Sort of when economists, as well as our internal teams, have been talking about sort of the next big date that we're eyeing, and in terms of both economic recovery and the next phase of the kind of pandemic fueled consumer journey. And we know that currently the lack of childcare is playing a big role in not only the current job market, but also that then manifests itself. There's a bit of a domino effect, right, in terms of how that manifests itself in terms of shopping behavior and the broader implications that might have, for example, on something like labor shortage. So kids are going back to school, in that September timeframe. Vaccination penetration will have continued to grow. It's also the expected rollback date for a lot of the extended unemployment benefits. We're going to see another shift in that polarized kind of income view that we talked about today. So I think that's going to give us a different baseline from which to continue to evaluate the economic circumstances. We're in sort of this gray area right now where we're not fully open, but we're also not closed anymore. And so September is really what we're kind of keeping an eye on in terms of that next horizon.
Great. I lied. That wasn't the last question. One more just came in, and I'm going to throw you away. Do you have any insights on the current transportation prices or rising global logistics costs?
So not on me today, but that's definitely something that we could talk about. If you want to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn, or Joe can connect us. It's something we think about and is included in a lot of the models that we run, in particular around the pricing work that we do. So would be happy to have a further discussion there.
Great. And we will be posting this on our blog following the global market. So we'll have your information in there and your LinkedIn link as well. So thank you so much. Thanks for all the great information. And I look forward to catching up with you and Meg again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
Bye.